I never thought the sound of rain on a windshield could feel like the end of everything. But that night it did. It was coming down in sheets, drumming against the roof of my old minivan, while my 3 kids slept in the back, bundled under a pile of worn blankets. Their faces were peaceful, soft, innocent. And I remember thinking, how am I supposed to tell them that we don't have a home anymore? My name is Ethan, and just a few months ago I had a job, a rented house, and some kind of plan. Then everything fell apart faster than I could catch it. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, a single father with 3 kids, no job, no money, and nowhere left to go, what would you have done? Would you have stayed and fought, or would you have run the moment things got strange? Because I did neither, and maybe that's why what happened next still keeps me up at night. It started with the layoff. 9 years I worked at the steel plant. I gave that place my back, my lungs, and most of my youth. Then one gray afternoon, the manager called me into his office, stared down at a piece of paper instead of my face, and told me automation had made my position redundant. Redundant, that word hit harder than the pink slip. I wasn't a person anymore, just an expense they'd decided to cut. I tried to smile, shake his hand, but by the time I reached the parking lot, my stomach was in knots. On the drive home, I practiced what I'd say to the kids. It's okay, Daddy's just switching jobs, it'll be fine. But when I pulled into our driveway and saw the bright orange eviction notice plastered on the door, I knew fine wasn't even close to the truth. The landlord had been patient for months, but patience doesn't pay mortgages. I had 10 days to leave. I begged, borrowed, sold what I could. No one was hiring, not in our town. Every help wanted sign came with a line of desperate faces ahead of me. When the 10th day came, I watched my kids pack their toys into trash bags because that's all we had left to carry them in. My oldest, Lucas, tried to act brave for his brother and sister. He was 10 going on 40, staring at me with those questioning eyes that asked, "What do we do now?" I told him, "We go on a little adventure." I lied. For 2 weeks we lived in that van. I parked behind grocery stores near playgrounds, once even behind my old workplace until security chased us off. I pretended it was camping. We roasted marshmallows on a lighter one night, laughed, told stories. But kids notice things adults wish they didn't. They noticed when I skipped meals so they could eat. They noticed when my hands shook counting the last of our coins. And they noticed the morning I sat in the driver's seat staring at nothing for an hour. Because I had no idea where to go next. That was the morning I found the road that led to the cabin. It wasn't on any map. I just turned off the main highway because I saw a faded sign that said Ashford Hollow 5 miles. The farther we drove, the narrower the road got, until branches scraped the sides of the van like claws. The kids were asleep by then. And when the trees finally opened up, I saw it. An old wooden cabin sitting in a clearing like something forgotten by time. The porch leaned, the roof sagged, but it was shelter. I stopped the van, stepped out, and listened. Nothing but wind and the distant sound of water somewhere behind the trees. No trespassing sign, no chain, no sign of life at all. I told myself we'd stay one night. Just one. Inside it smelled of dust and wet wood, but it was dry. There was a stone fireplace blackened with soot, a crooked table, a few chairs that looked like they might crumble under weight. I gathered twigs, lit a small fire, spread blankets on the floor, and for the first time in weeks, the kids slept on something that didn't move. I sat there watching them by firelight, feeling both relief and shame. Relief that they were warm. Shame that I'd brought them to a place I didn't own, a place that felt wrong somehow, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the silence. The kind that doesn't just fill the air, it presses against your skin. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the shutters. Emma, my 8-year-old, found an old broom and started sweeping dust like it was a game. "We can fix it, Daddy," she said. Noah, my youngest at 5, laughed when a mouse darted across the floor. They weren't afraid. Maybe that was why I decided to stay another night and then another. I found an old hand pump outside that still coughed up rusty water. There was a half-collapsed shed with tools. It was like the cabin wanted to help us survive. Every day I repaired something. A loose board, a leaky roof tile, and every night the place felt a little less hostile. Then came the first sign that someone else had been there. I found footprints in the dirt path leading to the creek. Big ones heavier than mine. I thought maybe hunters, but they circled the cabin and stopped right at the porch steps. I waited for someone to show up claiming ownership, ready to apologize, maybe beg to stay a little longer. But no one came. Days passed. The kids started calling it the treehouse on the ground. We painted rocks, collected pine cones, told stories by firelight. For the first time since the layoff, they were smiling again. I started believing maybe fate had led us there for a reason. That belief shattered one night when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the fallen leaves. I grabbed the hammer I kept by my side and looked through the cracked window. In the moonlight, I saw a shape, tall, broad-shouldered, standing just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved. It stood there watching the cabin for what felt like forever, before melting back into the woods. I waited until dawn to step outside, but there were no prints, nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The following afternoon, while exploring behind the cabin, I found something buried under a pile of leaves, an old wooden box swollen from years of moisture. Inside were papers, a few rusted tools, and a small leather journal. The name Samuel Green was written inside the cover. Most pages were ruined, but some were legible enough to read. They talked about the land, about keeping it quiet, and about a debt to the woods. It sounded half mad, half poetic, but one sentence stuck with me. The land remembers sorrow. I didn't know what it meant, but it made me uneasy. That night I dreamed of knocking. Slow, heavy knocks that echoed through the cabin even though the door never moved. When I woke, sweat plastered my shirt to my back. The kids were still asleep, everything still. But outside the window something caught my eye. A small wooden carving hanging from the porch beam. I hadn't put it there. It was a circle with a cross through it, crudely whittled. I took it down and tossed it into the fire, telling myself some local kids must have left it. Still, I sat up the rest of the night watching the door. The next morning I walked to town, if you could call it that, a handful of buildings around a gas station to look for work. I found a diner with a help wanted sign and asked the owner, a gray-haired woman named Marla, if she needed anyone part-time. She hesitated when I said we were staying near Ashford Hollow. Up by the old Green property? She asked. When I nodded, she frowned. That place has bad history, hun. Folks used to say it was cursed. I laughed it off. Curses were the least of my problems. She gave me dishwashing shifts anyway, probably out of pity, and told me I could take leftovers home for the kids. For a few weeks, things almost felt normal. I'd leave early, work at the diner, come home to the smell of firewood and the kids' laughter echoing through the trees. Then one evening I came back to find the door wide open and the cabin ransacked. Drawers pulled out, cushions torn, and the box with Samuel Green's papers gone. Lucas told me a man had come by, asked if their father was around. He hadn't hurt them, just looked around and left. Rage like I'd never known boiled inside me. I wanted to find him, but there was no sign of anyone on the road, and the wood swallowed sound like a grave. That night I stayed outside with the hammer in my hand, waiting. Around midnight, movement among the trees. A figure, same height, same stillness. I shouted, "Hey, what do you want?" The man stepped forward just enough for the moonlight to catch his face. Gray beard, weathered skin, eyes like stone. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This place isn't yours. It's his." "Whose?" I demanded. But he was already turning away. "Leave before it remembers you," he muttered, and disappeared. I didn't tell the kids. I told myself he was just some crazy drifter. But the next morning there was a note nailed to the door. "Leave while you can." The words looked shaky, hurried, written with charcoal maybe. I tore it down and burned it, but fear settled deep in my chest. The kids could tell something was wrong. Emma asked, "Daddy, are we safe here?" I said yes, but my voice cracked halfway through. Days blurred. The diner job barely paid gas money, and the van's engine had started coughing again. Every night I heard noises outside. Sometimes whispers, sometimes scratching, once what sounded like sobbing. The forest that had seemed peaceful when we arrived now felt alive, aware. The trees leaned closer. Shadows shifted even when the wind was still. And every morning I'd find little things moved. A chair pulled from the table, the door slightly ajar even though I knew I'd locked it. One evening after work, I stopped by the library in town. I asked the librarian if she knew anything about Samuel Green. Her eyes widened. "Old story," she said. "He was one of the first settlers out that way. Lost his boy in a fire, went mad trying to bring him back. People said he did. Things in those woods. Then he vanished." She lowered her voice. "Some folks think he never left." I laughed it off in front of her, but my hands were shaking on the drive back. When I reached the cabin that night, snow had started falling. The kids were inside, huddled near the fire, excited about the first flakes. For a moment, their joy dulled the fear. I tucked them in, watched the fire burn low, and almost believed we could make it through the winter. But just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. Footsteps outside circling the cabin. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped right by the window. Then a voice, muffled but clear. "Ethan." My name, whispered like a memory. I jumped up, flung the door open. Nothing, just the snow swirling in the moonlight. But in the fresh powder were prints, large, booted, leading into the woods. I followed them a few yards before they vanished, like the person had simply sunk into the earth. I turned back, heart hammering. On the porch sat a small object half buried in snow, the same carved symbol I'd thrown into the fire days ago, unburned, untouched by soot. I left it there. The next morning I packed our things. I told the kids we'd head to town, maybe find a motel. But when I turned the key, the van only coughed once and died. The battery was gone. Literally gone, the cables cut clean. Someone had been under the hood. That's when I realized whoever or whatever wanted us there didn't plan on letting us leave easily. And that's where I was, trapped in the woods with 3 children. No car, no phone signal. A stranger stalking the property, and a creeping sense that the land itself was watching us. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to imagine standing in my place. 3 little faces depending on you, nowhere else to go, and a storm rolling in. Would you run through those dark woods hoping to find help? Or would you stay in the only shelter left even if it felt cursed? Because that night I had to make that choice. The wind that night sounded like a living thing. It screamed through the cracks in the cabin walls, rattled the shutters, and made the chimney moan like something trapped inside. I sat by the fire clutching the hammer, listening to every creak of the floorboards. The kids were asleep in the corner, their faces glowing orange in the flicker of the fire. I should have been planning a way out, but my mind was stuck replaying that whisper. My name, said in a voice that didn't belong to anyone alive. The storm grew worse. Snow slammed against the windows and the roof groaned under the weight. I don't know when I drifted off, but I woke up to silence. No wind, no fire crackle, just the sound of someone breathing behind me. I froze. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it would wake the kids. Slowly I turned my head. No one was there. The door was still bolted, but the air felt colder, heavier, like the room was full of invisible eyes. Then I saw it, frost on the inside of the window pane, forming words from the condensation. Leave. I jumped up, grabbed my jacket, and shook Lucas awake. We're going, I whispered. He blinked at me, confused. Now? But it's still dark. Now, I said, louder than I meant to. I scooped Noah into my arms, grabbed Emma's hand, and pulled them outside into the snow. The cold cut through us instantly. The storm had died down, leaving the woods unnaturally quiet. The van sat under a blanket of snow, still useless without a battery. I decided to walk. Town was about 6 miles, maybe 7. The kids were bundled, in blankets trudging behind me, but after half an hour my legs were numb and Noah started crying. I knew we wouldn't make it. We turned back. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was breathing. And when we reached the clearing again, I swear I saw someone standing at the edge of the forest, motionless, watching us. I hurried the kids inside, locked the door, and threw another log on the fire. My breath trembled as I told them it was just the wind, that we were safe. But I didn't believe my own words. Later, when they'd fallen asleep again, I opened the old journal one more time. There were pages I hadn't seen before, stuck together by age. I pried them apart carefully and read by the firelight. Samuel Green wrote about a promise to the forest, about his son's death in the fire, and how he'd begged the land to give the boy back. He mentioned something he'd built, a binding, circle made of wood and ash, hidden beneath the cabin to hold the debt. The last line before the ink trailed off said, "He stays as long as the house stands." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the journal. I had no idea what that meant, but it explained why the place felt alive, why the trees seemed to lean closer every night. Maybe he'd gone insane after his loss. Or maybe he'd done something worse. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By dawn, I decided to check beneath the floorboards. I moved the table aside, pried up a few loose boards near the hearth, and a wave of rot and cold air rushed up from below. There was a small crawl space, barely big enough to fit in. I lowered a lantern and froze. Carvings, hundreds of them, covered the dirt walls. Strange symbols like the one I'd found hanging on the porch. In the center was something that didn't belong underground. A child's toy horse, burned and half melted, sitting on a circle of blackened wood. My stomach turned. Someone had done a ritual down there, maybe decades ago, maybe more than once. I sealed the boards back up and told myself I'd imagined it all. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks on the door. The same rhythm I'd dreamed about before. The kids jumped awake. I whispered for them to stay put and crept toward the door. "Who's there?" I called. No answer, just silence. Then another 3 knocks. I pulled the door open, expecting to see the bearded man again. But there was no one. Only snow and a trail of footprints leading into the trees. I couldn't take it anymore. I wrapped the kids in blankets, grabbed a lantern, and decided to follow the tracks. I needed to end this. The trail led deeper than I'd ever gone before, twisting between old pines until the trees opened into a small clearing. There, half buried in the snow, was a grave marker. A single stone with words worn almost smooth. Samuel Green, 1897-1925. The land remembers. My breath caught. Someone had buried him right here. The air around the grave felt wrong, thick and charged like static. Then I noticed something else, a shape standing behind the tree line, watching. I lifted the lantern and shouted, "What do you want from us?" The shape didn't move. For a second I thought it was gone, but then I heard a whisper in the wind. "You stayed too long." The flame flickered out. Darkness swallowed everything. I grabbed the kids and ran. Branches whipped our faces, snow blinded us, and behind us I swear I heard footsteps following. Not running, just steady, deliberate steps that never seemed to get closer or farther. We burst through the clearing into the cabin and slammed the door. I shoved the table against it, shaking. Lucas clung to my arm. "Dad, who was that?" I didn't have an answer. The fire flared on its own then, bright and angry, throwing long shadows across the walls. The symbols I'd seen under the floorboards seemed to shimmer faintly, like they were alive. That night, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of Emma screaming. When I reached her, she was pointing at the corner of the room. "He was right there," she sobbed. "The man with the gray face." There was nothing there, but the air smelled of smoke, thick and bitter. I held her until she stopped shaking, but inside I was falling apart. I knew we couldn't stay another night. At dawn I'd take them, walk to town no matter how far it was. I'd carry them if I had to. But dawn never came the way it should have. When I opened the door the next morning, the world outside wasn't just snowy. It was wrong. The forest looked different, denser, darker. The path we'd taken to town was gone, replaced by endless trees. I walked a few yards before realizing the cabin wasn't behind me anymore. Just emptiness. Panic gripped me. I called out, and my voice echoed like the woods were hollow. I turned back, found the cabin again somehow, but something told me we weren't in the same place we'd been before. Lucas found another note that day, slid under the door like someone had pushed it through. He wants his family back. That was all it said. I felt my knees give out. Whoever or whatever was haunting this land wasn't after revenge. It was after replacement. It had lost its family, and we'd walked right into its story. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The kids huddled together while I sat awake staring into the fire, every instinct screaming that we were being watched. Around midnight, the flames dimmed and the shadows on the walls started to move, slowly, independently of the light. One shadow detached itself and stretched across the floor toward us. I grabbed a burning log and swung it, shouting for it to stop. The shadow recoiled, hissed like steam, and vanished. Then the whole cabin shook like something massive had hit the ground outside. I threw the door open and saw him, Samuel Green, or what was left of him. His skin was pale and cracked like old bark. His eyes 2 hollow embers burning faintly red. "You took what's mine," he said, voice deep and distant. "Leave this place. We're trying," I shouted back. "We didn't mean to be here." His head tilted slightly, as if he didn't understand. "You can't leave. The debt isn't paid." He lifted a hand and the trees around us groaned, bending toward the cabin. The door slammed shut on its own, and a gust of cold rushed through, snuffing out the fire. I ran to the kids, holding them close, whispering that it would be okay, even though I didn't believe it. The darkness pressed closer, and I remembered the line from his journal. He stays as long as the house stands. That was it. The house was the anchor. If it fell, maybe the bond would break. I told Lucas to take his brother and sister outside through the window while I stayed. "Dad, no!" he cried, but I was already grabbing the kerosene from the corner. "Go," I shouted. "Run until you can't see the cabin anymore." I poured the kerosene across the floorboards, over the hearth, up the walls. The figure of Samuel Green loomed in the doorway, the wind howling through him like smoke. "It's over," I said. He stepped closer. "You can't destroy what's bound." I struck a match and threw it. The flames roared to life instantly, leaping up the walls, eating the old dry wood. Green screamed, not like a man, but like the forest itself was wailing. The ground shook. The symbols carved into the walls glowed bright red, then cracked. I stumbled out through the back window, the heat blistering my skin, and ran toward the tree line where I saw my kids waiting. We watched from a distance as the cabin burned. The flames turned the snow orange and gold, the smoke rising high into the dark sky. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the fire went silent. The cabin collapsed inward, the last of the roof caving with a hiss. And just like that, the forest went still. Not dead, just quiet, peaceful. For the first time since arriving, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. We made it to the road by dawn. A passing truck picked us up a few hours later and dropped us near the diner. Marla nearly fainted when she saw us. "Lord, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. She called the sheriff, who drove out to check the property. When he came back, his face was pale. "There's no cabin there," he said. "Just a clearing and some old ashes. Like it's been gone for years." I tried to argue, told him where it was, described every detail, but he just shook his head. "Son, that place burned down back in the 40s. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that symbol, those red glowing carvings, that face. The kids didn't talk about it much. Maybe they blocked it out, or maybe they understood something I didn't. I found work at a construction site in the next town over, and Marla helped us find a small apartment above the diner. It wasn't much, but it was home. Still, sometimes at night I wake up and swear I hear those slow, heavy knocks on the wall. A few months later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back toward Ashford Hollow, just to see it one last time, to convince myself it was really gone. The forest had reclaimed the road, but I managed to reach the clearing. Where the cabin had stood, there was only grass and snow. No ash, no wood, nothing. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small wooden carving hanging from a branch. A circle with a cross through it. No, not weathered. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe near it. I just walked away. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just leftover debris. But as I drove off, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. Someone standing where the carving hung, tall and still, watching the road. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed when you knew something ancient and broken was watching from the trees? Or would you have burned it all down too? I don't know if I did the right thing, but I know this. The land remembers, just like he said. And sometimes it remembers you. If you were on my side, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments, what do you think really happened in those woods? Was it a ghost or something older than that? Either way, thanks for listening. I'll see you all in the next story.